Good morning, everybody. Thank you. Thank you for that very warm welcome. It is great to be with the Maryland State Education Association. To your terrific president, Betty Weller, let's give it up for her, please. And she's been a terrific leader for all of us. Got to get this microphone set there. There we go. And to your Vice President, Cheryl Bose, thank you for all your leadership. And to your team here and to all of you, thank you for what you do every day as the family that comes together to educate our kids and provide a quality education for all of us. You know, my wife, Catherine, and I had 3 children. All of them went through the Maryland public school system, so we thank you for the good work that you have all done together. Now, I think we all know that we're in a pretty wild election year. The good news is it will be over in just about 2 weeks. But we do have a whole lot of work to do between now and Election Day. And we just finished the 3rd presidential debate. How many of you watched that presidential debate? So, as I watched them, I watched number 1, number 2, and number 3, and Hillary Clinton ran the table in those debates. 1, 2, knockout punch number 3. And I was watching closely because 4 years ago, I had the experience, it was a fun experience, of actually playing Paul Ryan in the practice debates with Vice President Joe Biden. So in practice debates, they set up the table just like it's going to be on debate night. And so for 4 days up in Delaware, I had the opportunity to insult the Vice President of the United States and then be thanked for it at the end of the day. But at least in that debate, I knew there were going to be some boundaries to what Paul Ryan might say to Vice President Joe Biden in the debates. And I cannot imagine how you go about preparing for a debate with Donald Trump. But whatever it was, Hillary Clinton did a great job, and now we've got 2 weeks to go. She is going to need a majority in the United States Senate and reinforcements in the House of Representatives to make sure that we can move the country forward and that we can make the kind of investments we need in the area of education. And so I'm very grateful to all of you, very grateful for your support in this election this year. We have had the great benefit of having Barbara Mikulski as our senator. I do want to publicly thank her and ask you to give her a big round of applause. She understood the importance of investments in education and other important areas for our country. In fact, I learned a little while ago that because she was the person who saved the Hubble telescope, which is made in the state of Maryland, that when the NASA scientists discovered a new supernova, they named it after her. So there's Supernova Mikulski. And she has been a great force in the United States Senate. And with your help, I hope to build on that tradition. And I want to say what an honor it has been to work with all of you during my entire time in public service. We worked very closely together during my time in the state legislature. Many of you may remember that the Maryland Court of Appeals, our highest court, determined back in the late 1990s, early 2000s, that the way we funded public schools in Maryland was both inadequate and inequitable. And the result of that court finding was the creation of the Thornton Commission. And we worked together to make sure that the Thornton Commission was designed in the right way and to make sure that we provided resources to those school systems throughout the state that were in the toughest shape and had the least resources, because part of the obligation of the state government and the federal government is to make sure that every child and every school system has the resources they need to succeed. That has to be a priority. In our country, we have a school funding formula which at its core, if you think about it, is inequitable. It's based on property taxes. The result of that is that jurisdictions with relatively greater wealth can fund their school systems with actually lower property tax rates. So it is the obligation of state and federal governments to make sure that we provide every school system so that they can provide every child with the resources needed to succeed in the United States of America. That has to be our trust, and that has to be what we do together. That's what we did with the Thornton Commission, but we know we need to build on it. And there's talk right now in Annapolis of doing Thornton 2, round 2, and we all need to work together to make sure that that moves forward. We also worked together back in the day to try to expand funds to modernize our schools and classrooms. At that time, there was a whole lot of taxpayer money going into funding stadiums, football stadiums. And we got together and said, if you're going to be putting that kind of money into stadiums, my goodness, we've got to put a lot more money into funding our classrooms and our schools. And so I introduced a piece of legislation entitled Schools Before Stadiums that prohibited the monies from going forward in the stadiums until we made sure we did right by our schools. And we also know we've got a lot of work still to do in that area together. Since I was elected to the United States Congress, and I want to thank you for your support in 2002 in that race for the United States Congress, we have worked together on a number of important fronts. Most recently, last year, when Congress passed the update to the Elementary and Secondary Schools Authorization Act, passing the Every School Succeeds legislation. You know, it didn't get a lot of attention, but it was, in fact, a bipartisan victory in the United States Congress, in the House and the Senate, people working across party lines to keep the important parts of No Child Left Behind, but to get rid of the very many unproductive pieces of the old No Child Left Behind law. And one of the things we really focused on doing was giving you, the educators, more of the direct authority over decision-making as to what happens in the classrooms. That has got to be a priority because you are on the front lines. You know what works and doesn't work, which is why I've always benefited greatly whenever you come to Washington, D.C., to Congress, or whenever I'm out in the community, learning directly from you as to what works based on your experience. So when we passed the Every Student Succeeds Act, we got rid of this obsessive and sole focus on more and more high-stakes testing. We got rid of that and put forward measures that were based on a lot of other factors, because I think all of us know that the purpose of that testing should be to provide all of us with guidance as to what works best for our students. The purpose should not be to punish students and schools through high-stakes testing. That is not the objective. The objective is to make sure our kids and our students have what they need, and all of you have the resources to provide the guidance and education that they need. So now that we've passed that law in Congress, we still got a lot of work to do at the federal level and the state level and the local level. At the federal level, we've worked together to try to advance legislation to provide the federal resources to back up the federal rhetoric. And I've introduced, with your support, every year for the past couple years, legislation entitled Keep Our Pact, Keep Our Promises to America's Children and Teachers and Education Community. And the idea is pretty simple. If you look at what Congress says is necessary in terms of funding to meet our federal education obligations, it's a much bigger number than the resources Congress actually provides every year. It's the difference between what's called the authorizing level, which is the level that the policymakers say is necessary to accomplish our education goals, and the appropriated level, which is the amount of dollars and cents that's actually delivered. We need to make sure that what's delivered is what's necessary to do the job. And so the Keep Our Pact Act does at the federal level what we did in Maryland. It makes education funding a priority so that it becomes a mandatory funding requirement, not something that's at the whims of the legislature every single year. That's how we show our kids that we are serious about the resources for their education. It also requires that we finally meet the federal funding obligations to fully fund IDEA and special education. Because we did the right thing as a country many, many years ago when we said that every child should have a chance at a great education. Kids with disabilities should be able to reach their full potential. And then Congress said that we, the federal government, are going to provide 40% of the funding. Well, as we're gathered here today, Congress is only at 16% of that promise that was made many decades ago. And so this legislation would put Congress back on track over a period of time to meet the promise that it made decades ago. Because we need to make sure that we don't have school systems that have to pit funding for IDEA against funding for other requirements. We're all in this together, and we should make sure all those funds are there. We also know that we ask a whole lot of our education community, all of you, every day. We ask you not just to be educating our kids, but to be addressing a lot of other issues that we need to deal with as a broader society. We know that if we are going to really attack and defeat the achievement gap, we've also got to make sure that we attack poverty in this country in a serious and focused way. And so I put forward proposals to do that, but within our school communities, I also support strongly the idea of community schools. Community schools, and we put a provision for community schools in the most recent Education Authorization Act, the Every Student Succeeds, because we know that when a child comes to school hungry, or a child comes to school with a whole lot of issues going on in the neighborhood, or a child leaves school at the end of the day and doesn't have opportunities, that child isn't able to realize the full opportunities that we as society could provide. So I'm a big believer in making sure we fund after-school programs and making sure that we have the wraparound services that are necessary. And we need to expand the schools and have that community support, because we shouldn't be asking you to be doing all of it all the time. And so let's work together to get that done. So finally, as I said at the outset, we got 2 weeks to go in this election. And all of us know we've got a lot of important policy priorities. I mentioned some of them: investing in education, making sure that we have an economy that works for everybody, not just the folks at the very top, making sure we enact criminal justice reform in our country, because it's a scandal that we have mass incarceration in the United States. We have 5% of the world's population, 25% of the world's prison population. That's because we're locking up a lot of people who are nonviolent substance abusers. And we all know that we have a substance abuse problem across our state. We have an opioid epidemic. The best way to deal with that is to attack it as a health issue as opposed to a criminal issue. And so we've got to work on that. We got to make sure we protect our beautiful Chesapeake Bay and deal with issues like climate change, the costs of doing nothing are way too high, and the opportunities in addressing climate change are real economic opportunities for all of us. So we've got a big agenda. And in order to get the policy right, we do have to do our politics right. Because at the end of the day, the decisions that go through Congress obviously come down to a vote. And if you don't have the votes, you can't pass that agenda forward. And so in addition to making sure that we elect Hillary Clinton as the next President of the United States, we need to make sure that we build a majority of the United States Congress that is going to focus on the priority of educating our kids. And so in closing, let me thank you for being on the front lines. Thank you for letting me be a partner with you during my time in the state legislature and in the House of Representatives. And with your help, we will continue that partnership in the United States Senate. Thank you, and let me just close with one of my very favorite sayings, which is that the world needs dreamers and the world needs doers. But most of all, the world needs dreamers who do. Thank you for being the people who dream big for our kids in our community, but not just dreaming big, doing it every day in our schools to build a stronger Maryland and a stronger United States of America. God bless you, and thank you.